Hello, tonight you travel backward beyond the rise of great empires, into a quieter age when rivers shaped human lives more gently than kings or armies ever could. You move through lands where wetlands shimmer beneath moonlight, where the first copper fires glow softly against the dark, and where history still feels half asleep beside drifting reeds and endless stars above silent waters tonight. You begin beside the slow waters between the Nile, the Tigris and the Euphrates, where early villages rest near marshes filled with tall reeds moving softly through evening wind. Damp soil and drying barley scent the cooling air nearby. A fisherman untangles his net patiently, probably wishing ancient mosquitoes respected reasonable personal boundaries after sunset tonight there. The rivers move quietly across broad floodplains, carrying fertile soil from distant unseen mountains. Beyond dusty horizons, mud-brick homes stand low against the earth beneath pale golden light, blending naturally into surrounding landscapes. Archaeologists later discover ancient pollen, revealing wetter climates, enormous wetlands, and wider green reed fields than modern travelers usually expect across Mesopotamia today somehow. So before you get completely comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're creating here. Perhaps while you settle into tonight's journey, you might also share your local time and location in the comments below. Somewhere across the world, another quiet listener may be preparing for sleep beneath an entirely different sky this evening. Now, slowly dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan, letting the steady hum of the air fill the room. And in that gentle rhythm, we quietly step into tonight's journey together. You continue walking beside ancient waterways where flocks of migrating birds circle lazily overhead. Their reflections ripple across shallow pools, while frogs murmur softly among reeds, sounding oddly like elderly scholars debating grain taxes beside invisible marshland councils at midnight. You notice how slowly life unfolds here during the 4th millennium BCE, long before organized armies appear along distant horizons. Farmers guide wooden plows through damp earth, while children gather reeds beside riverbanks, glowing beneath afternoon light. The landscape feels patient and almost untouched by ambition. Even time itself seems softer, drifting lazily across wetlands like smoke rising from distant cooking fires beneath calm evening skies. As dusk settles across the plains, cooking fires glow beside clustered homes built from mud and straw beneath enormous darkening skies. Smoke rises softly while clay pots simmer over open flames and quiet conversations drift through cooling air. One exhausted goat wanders confidently into somebody's dinner again, apparently treating household boundaries as very flexible concepts after sunset tonight nearby. Near a riverside settlement, early metalworkers kneel beside shallow furnaces, lined carefully with heated stones and packed clay. Green-blue copper ore rests within glowing charcoal fires, while sparks drift upward like wandering stars through darkness. These craftsmen cannot imagine bronze weapons reshaping trade, warfare, and political authority someday. Tonight, they simply work slowly beneath patient constellations and cool night air together. You sit beside a glowing furnace, while copper softens slowly within rising heat and drifting smoke. The metal cools later into rough tools, fishing hooks, and ornaments traded between nearby settlements. Historians believe early copper-working knowledge spreads gradually through migration and trade instead of conquest. Innovation moves quietly here, like rainwater slipping across dry earth after summer storms. Far beyond the villages, broad marshlands stretch toward distant horizons, where papyrus reeds sway beneath steady evening wind. Waterbirds glide across, reflective pools, while fish disturb the surface with widening circles. Environmental studies suggest southern Mesopotamia once supported enormous wetland ecosystems. The region feels less like harsh desert and more like a vast, breathing shoreline. Beside rivers, you begin noticing how completely daily life depends upon repeating natural cycles shaped by floodwater and fertile soil. Rivers overflow, retreat and nourish nearby fields with dark sediment carried from distant mountains. Villagers repair irrigation ditches using polished wooden tools worn smooth through years of labor. Everything unfolds slowly, calmly, and, with almost meditative repetition, beside moving water tonight. As evening deepens, stars emerge gradually across clear skies, untouched by industrial smoke or electric light. Ancient travelers navigate these rivers through memory and constellations, mirrored faintly across dark water surfaces below. Silence expands naturally between sounds here. A paddle touches water softly. An owl calls from distant reeds. Somewhere nearby, somebody drops a clay bowl and immediately regrets it tonight. You continue downstream where settlements grow larger beside fertile farmland and carefully managed irrigation systems. Grain storage pits appear beside communal, gathering spaces while woven baskets dry against warm mud-brick walls beneath fading sunlight. Archaeological evidence reveals increasingly organized food management during this period. Communities slowly discover cooperation, often preserve survival better than conflict beside unpredictable rivers and changing seasons nearby. The night air cools softly as families gather beside low fires for meals of barley bread, lentils, dates, and riverfish seasoned with herbs. Gentle laughter drifts between homes while storytellers describe floods, wandering ancestors, and stars overhead. One dramatic uncle still exaggerates the size of fish supposedly caught earlier beside nearby. Marshes today. You pause beside a narrow irrigation canal, reflecting pale moonlight through moving reeds and dark water. Carefully shaped channels guide life toward distant fields, resting beneath the quiet sky. Ancient engineering already transforms these landscapes through patient labor and cooperation. Nobody here fully understands agriculture will someday influence kingdoms, labor systems, and political authority across surrounding regions. As deeper night settles across the wetlands, the villages appear peaceful beneath endless constellations, drifting slowly overhead. Dogs sleep beside doorways while fading embers glow softly inside clay hearths sheltered from cool wind. Archaeologists later uncover traces of these homes buried beneath sediment, preserving footprints, broken pottery, and forgotten tools through immense stretches of silent time below. Beyond the horizon, distant trade paths already connect scattered communities through exchanged stone, timber, shells, and copper ore carried across difficult terrain. These fragile networks move slowly, beside rivers and remembered landmarks guided by trust between unfamiliar groups. Entire civilizations quietly depend upon ordinary travelers, stubbornly transporting heavy goods while insisting exhausting journeys remain perfectly manageable somehow today. You finally arrive beside a silent riverbank where darkness settles, softly over still water and sleeping reeds beneath ancient stars. Far away, faint hammering echoes from another village where copper glows inside patient fires through the night. The sound drifts gently across the wetlands before fading again, while future cities begin forming silently somewhere ahead beyond darkness tonight. You continue traveling slowly through the fertile valleys of southern Mesopotamia, where the earliest Bronze Age cities rise not from sudden violence, but from patience repeated over generations. Water channels stretch beside barley fields, while farmers cross soft morning mud beneath pale skies, as rivers quietly encourage communities to settle and cooperate together peacefully. Ahead of you, the ancient city of Uruk emerges slowly from the plain, like a distant sand-colored shoreline beneath warm afternoon light. Massive mud-brick walls surround expanding temple districts shaped through generations of labor and rebuilding. Historians consider Uruk one of humanity's earliest urban centers. Workers carrying clay baskets probably already dream about improved transportation for exhausted backs everywhere. The city feels alive without becoming rushed or chaotic beneath broad Mesopotamian skies and drifting heat. Narrow pathways wind between clustered homes where woven mats hang beside courtyards filled with grain jars and drying fishing equipment. Children carry water from nearby canals, while merchants arrange onions, dates and barley cakes carefully beneath shaded market corners nearby today. Nothing here appears especially dramatic or theatrical, despite the city's growing importance. Beside the rivers, civilization expands gradually through repeated routines, cooperative labor, and organized agriculture, supporting larger populations each passing generation. Uruk resembles reeds spreading quietly along riverbanks after seasonal flooding retreats. Growth unfolds patiently here, shaped more by maintenance and repetition than sudden heroic events altogether. You pass beneath towering temple platforms, rising carefully above surrounding neighborhoods and crowded streets nearby. Later, civilizations call these sacred structures ziggurats because of their layered mud brick terraces and broad stairways glowing beneath sunlight. Priests oversee offerings of grain, oil, and livestock, while scribes press wedge-shaped marks into soft clay tablets beside dusty administrative courtyards each afternoon today. The earliest cuneiform writing appears in Uruk around 3400 BCE, mostly recording grain deliveries, labor assignments, and trade goods entering temple storage systems nearby. You notice how practical these first records seem compared with modern paperwork, overflowing endlessly with advertisements and forgotten passwords nobody remembers properly anymore. Ancient scribes simply track barley, livestock, and worker obligations. Beneath warm Mesopotamian sunlight today there, as evening approaches, cool air drifts gently through the city, carrying scents of baked bread, river mud, and wood smoke from nearby cooking fires. Bronze remains rare during this period, still too valuable for ordinary household use. Yet inside temple workshops and wealthy homes, artisans carefully experiment with bronze alloys beneath flickering oil lamps after sunset beside quiet streets tonight, nearby together. You enter a modest residential district where homes cluster, around shared courtyards lined with storage jars and woven reed baskets. Archaeologists discover organized neighborhoods beside narrow, shaded lanes, designed partly for drainage and cooling airflow. Families sleep upon reed mats, while animals rest nearby overnight. Somewhere behind one mud brick wall, somebody argues quietly about missing bread again tonight somehow. The canals surrounding Uruk shape nearly every part of daily life across the growing city and surrounding farmland. Workers clear silt from irrigation channels, while wooden gates guide water steadily toward distant agricultural fields. You begin understanding civilization depends less upon rulers than maintenance repeated endlessly through ordinary labor. Without functioning canals, harvests weaken and markets gradually empty afterward nearby together. At dawn, boats glide quietly through narrow waterways carrying reeds, fish, pottery and grain toward crowded dock areas beside the city. River transport remains easier than hauling heavy goods across rough terrain beneath exhausting heat and drifting dust. Historians believe water traffic helps Mesopotamian cities expand economically long before reliable roads appear across the surrounding regions afterward. You wander beside a busy workshop where potters shape clay vessels upon spinning wheels, turned steadily by practiced hands throughout the afternoon. Nearby weavers produce linen cloth, while carpenters smooth wooden beams using worn copper-edged tools. Bronze technology develops gradually within these specialized environments rather than appearing suddenly. Innovation spreads softly through observation, apprenticeship, and trade between neighboring communities nearby. Beyond the neighborhoods, farmland stretches beside irrigation canals, reflecting pale sunlight like silver ribbons across fertile earth beneath broad skies. Farmers harvest barley while oxen pull wooden plows through flood-enriched soil beside quietly moving water. As darkness settles across Uruk, oil lamps flicker near temples and homes, while scribes finish clay tablet records documenting taxes, grain inventories, and occasional suspicious livestock accounting mysteries nobody completely explains afterward. Somehow today there, the stars above Mesopotamia appear remarkably bright without modern lights surrounding the horizon tonight. You stand beside a canal, listening to frogs calling softly through reeds, while distant dogs bark within sleeping neighborhoods. Nearby, despite containing thousands of residents, the city feels calm and orderly. Civilization often begins through peaceful routines, repeated patiently across generations together. Far beyond Uruk, trade caravans move slowly across deserts and mountain passes carrying materials unavailable beside the rivers themselves. Copper arrives from distant regions, while rare tin travels dangerous routes controlled by unfamiliar peoples. Historians still debate several Bronze Age tin sources today. The mystery occasionally makes archaeologists resemble exhausted detectives, investigating missing cookware ingredients across continents somehow. You imagine caravans approaching gradually beneath pale dawn skies, while donkeys carry woven packs filled with minerals and crafted goods. Travelers sleep beside roadside fires, exchanging stories about distant cities hidden beyond the horizon. Trade moves more than objects between settlements. Ideas, languages, technologies, and religious customs also travel quietly through repeated encounters between wandering merchants and unfamiliar communities nearby together. Near one marketplace, a wealthy official examines a polished bronze ornament, reflecting sunlight softly across embroidered robes and decorated sandals. Bronze remains, rare enough that many objects still serve ceremonial purposes rather than military functions. Nearby laborers continue shaping clay bricks and repairing canals with simpler tools, probably wondering why decorative knives receive greater admiration than practical shovels supporting entire cities daily. Late into the evening, musicians play gentle melodies upon reed pipes, while families gather across rooftops cooling beneath night air and drifting constellations. The city gradually quiets beside dark canal waters, reflecting faint starlight below. Civilization here still feels closely connected to nature itself. Mud brick structures rise directly from river sediment, shaped patiently into temples, homes, pathways, and storage halls. At the far edge of Uruk, beyond cultivated fields and final, clusters of homes, dusty roads disappear toward distant mountains, hidden beneath darkness tonight. Somewhere along those routes, caravans carrying precious tin continue moving slowly toward Mesopotamian cities beside the rivers. Their arrival will someday reshape economies and warfare. For now, the peaceful night remains undisturbed beneath drifting stars overhead. You leave the river cities of Mesopotamia behind and drift slowly westward toward the Nile, where ancient Egypt unfolds beneath broad skies and pale desert hills nearby. Life follows dependable rhythms shaped by returning floodwaters, nourishing fertile fields each year. The river rises and retreats patiently, measuring centuries beneath migrating birds and warm golden sunlight across quiet valleys together. Along the Nile's banks, villages rest peacefully between cultivated farmland and dry desert stone beneath. Clear skies today. Date palms sway above irrigation channels, while farmers guide wooden plows pulled steadily by oxen through damp black soil. Stability shapes these communities deeply. Even the atmosphere feels calmer here, as though the river politely discourages unnecessary dramatic behavior whenever possible nearby. Each year, floodwaters spread gradually across the Nile Valley, leaving nutrient-rich sediment essential for successful agriculture throughout nearby communities. Egyptian farmers study these cycles carefully across generations, organizing planting and harvesting with remarkable precision. Historians believe such dependable conditions support centralized administration and ambitious construction projects, much like reliable coffee supports unfinished paperwork everywhere today. You walk beside narrow canals branching outward from the Nile toward distant barley and emmer wheat fields beneath warm sunlight. Workers repair mud embankments using woven baskets and wooden tools strengthened gradually with bronze edges. Daily labor unfolds steadily beside painted temple walls, while scribes record harvest amounts upon papyrus scrolls drying quietly in afternoon air nearby. Near one temple complex, enormous granaries rise above the settlement like quiet guardians protecting future security beside the Nile. Grain from successful harvests remains stored carefully against years of poor flooding or shortages. Temple administrators maintain detailed accounting systems, recording inventories precisely. You still suspect somebody occasionally loses paperwork beneath grain records and blames the nearest apprentice afterward. Somehow, today, the architecture surrounding you reflects patience rather than urgency beneath warm Egyptian sunlight and drifting river air nearby. Stone columns painted with lotus patterns support shaded courtyards where priests move slowly through cool corridors, scented faintly with oil and incense. Bronze chisels and saws improve woodworking and construction techniques gradually, though everyday life still revolves around routines repeated gently across generations. You continue southward, where fishermen cast woven nets into calm river channels, reflecting drifting clouds and distant birds overhead today. Small boats transport grain, pottery and stone between settlements connected by the Nile's dependable current and carefully maintained waterways. Historians often describe ancient Egypt as a civilization unified largely by geography itself, with the river serving as a natural highway through society. As afternoon light softens, you arrive near Deir el-Medina, home to artisans and laborers, constructing royal tombs during later Bronze Age centuries nearby. Archaeologists excavating the settlement discover broken pottery fragments called ostraca, covered with casual notes, complaints, jokes, and observations. Suddenly, the ancient world feels unexpectedly familiar. Even tomb painters apparently grumble about co-workers and household inconveniences after exhausting days. One preserved message complains humorously about lazy workers avoiding responsibilities, while another records disputes involving food supplies and borrowed goods nearby. These fragments reveal ordinary personalities hidden beneath monumental architecture and royal propaganda across ancient Egypt. History often survives most vividly through small details. A forgotten shopping list or sarcastic remark sometimes carries greater warmth than massive statues carved carefully into cliffs. Nearby workshops remain active throughout the day, as carpenters shape imported cedar beams and metalworkers sharpen bronze tools beside glowing furnaces. Bronze axes, chisels, and saws improve woodworking precision gradually, supporting larger construction projects across Egypt. Yet most laborers continue living modestly despite technological advances. Change arrives slowly beside familiar riverbank, routines repeated across generations. The farther you travel along the Nile, the more clearly you sense the balance sustaining Egyptian society through centuries of organization. Water management, food storage, labor systems, and trade networks operate together with remarkable coordination. Scribes maintain records while farmers repair canals and officials supervise transportation beneath calm skies and drifting river mist each peaceful morning nearby. At sunset, the Nile reflects deep gold and blue beneath quiet skies, while birds settle among papyrus reeds beside the shoreline. Families gather inside cool courtyards for meals of bread, lentils, onions, and fish prepared over charcoal fires. Children chase one another between mud-brick walls, while one exhausted parent pretends not to notice fresh, muddy footprints tonight again, somehow nearby. The night sky above Egypt stretches vast and clear, without modern lights interrupting drifting constellations overhead tonight. Priests observe celestial movements carefully, connecting astronomy with agriculture and religious ceremonies throughout the Nile Valley. Time feels slower beneath these stars. Hours pass quietly between sounds of flowing water, rustling reeds, and distant paddles touching wooden boats drifting gently downstream through darkness below. Far beyond Egypt's borders, trade expands steadily across deserts, mountains, and seas, connecting distant civilizations through fragile economic networks. Tin remains especially valuable because bronze production depends completely upon reliable supplies transported from remote regions. Caravans carrying metal ingots move carefully through dangerous terrain, controlled by unfamiliar rulers and uncertain political alliances between neighboring cultures nearby together. You imagine one caravan crossing rocky mountain passes beneath cold evening winds somewhere beyond Anatolia and Mesopotamia tonight. Donkeys carry copper and tin wrapped carefully inside woven coverings, while traders rest beside guarded fires under unfamiliar stars overhead. These merchants may never visit Egypt themselves, yet their labor quietly supports tools, ornaments, and infrastructure throughout distant kingdoms connected through trade networks. Human societies remain linked through subtle exchanges resembling invisible threads woven carefully across continents and centuries together over time. Ideas, technologies, materials, and customs travel gradually between cultures that rarely fully understand one another completely. Civilization expands not only through rulers or armies, but through repeated encounters between wandering merchants, laborers, sailors, and travelers following difficult roads beneath changing skies nearby. Back beside the Nile, workers continue repairing canals by torchlight before seasonal floodwaters arrive once more across nearby farmland and settlements. Bronze shovels scrape softly against damp soil, while overseers discuss measurements and grain projections beside carefully maintained waterways. Everything feels remarkably methodical here. Ancient societies survive not simply through strength, but through planning, maintenance, and cooperation repeated patiently across generations together. As midnight approaches, cool desert air settles across temple courtyards and sleeping villages beside the quiet Nile tonight. Oil lamps flicker beside unfinished records, while distant boats carry grain beneath drifting stars. Beyond the valley, traders guide animals through narrow mountain passes where copper and precious tin travel slowly between civilizations. Far ahead along these dark roads, unseen transformations approach the sleeping Bronze Age world, one careful journey at a time. You move beyond the river valleys, following Bronze Age trade routes stretching across mountains, deserts, and coastlines beneath wandering clouds tonight. Bronze belongs to no single empire alone. It emerges gradually through connected landscapes, where miners, merchants, sailors, and caravan guides carry materials between distant peoples, separated by language, weather, and unfamiliar customs, across changing horizons, together silently nearby. High within Anatolia's rugged hills, copper miners descend narrow shafts, illuminated by trembling torchlight, against damp stone walls nearby tonight. The air smells of smoke, dust, and heated minerals rising from underground tunnels carved patiently through rock. Workers chip green-blue ore using stone hammers and worn bronze tools. Somebody still insists this dangerous profession counts as refreshing mountain employment somehow today. You begin noticing how difficult bronze production remains during these centuries throughout interconnected Bronze Age societies nearby today. Copper exists in several regions, yet tin appears rarer and more mysterious across distant trade networks. Modern researchers still debate many tin sources because ancient exchange routes extend astonishing distances through Central Asia, Anatolia, and neighboring territories hidden beneath forgotten roads and drifting sand. Caravans move slowly through mountain passes, carrying precious tin wrapped carefully within woven coverings beneath cold evening skies tonight. Donkeys step cautiously across narrow stone paths while traders watch changing weather patterns with constant attention overhead. A single storm may delay important shipments for weeks, across dangerous terrain connecting distant Bronze Age kingdoms together, silently nearby. Bronze Age economic stability often depends less upon rulers than exhausted animals successfully avoiding cliffs after sunset each evening somehow today. Traders continue forward through freezing winds and difficult mountain roads, while valuable metal travels slowly toward waiting workshops and crowded cities. Civilization itself sometimes rests upon stubborn endurance, careful navigation, and surprisingly patient donkeys crossing dangerous paths through darkness together. As you descend toward the Levantine coast, warmer sea air replaces the dry mountain. Cold surrounding nearby hills tonight. Olive groves spread across rolling landscapes, while villages appear beside sheltered harbors where fishing boats rock gently against wooden docks. Trade routes converge naturally between inland kingdoms and maritime cultures. Bronze Age economies flow gradually through landscapes, allowing movement and exchange together peacefully. You eventually arrive at Ugarit, where merchants from distant regions gather beside crowded warehouses and harbor streets nearby today. The scent of cedar wood, olive oil, sea salt and baked bread drifts through open marketplaces filled with pottery, textiles and imported goods. Ugarit flourishes partly because its location connects maritime trade with inland caravan routes, crossing neighboring territories. Ships approach the harbor beneath fluttering sails, while dockworkers unload timber, copper ingots, oil jars, wine, spices, and dyed cloth nearby tonight. Valuable bronze ingredients remain carefully protected among crowded shipments arriving from distant regions. Some copper ingots resemble stretched animal hides designed for easier transport. Ancient logistics already appear remarkably sophisticated, despite endless complaints about inventory counting from exhausted workers afterward. Near the waterfront, laborers stack cargo carefully inside mud brick storage buildings, shaded beneath woven awnings and timber roofs nearby today. Many workers, handling valuable goods, never personally own the items passing through their hands each day. Yet their labor sustains economic systems, linking mines, farms, workshops, and royal courts together, across enormous distances beneath broad Mediterranean skies and drifting sea winds. You walk through market streets where merchants speak different languages while bargaining patiently over copper weights, grain deliveries, carved ivory, and colorful glass beads imported from distant regions. Archaeologists later uncover cuneiform tablets in Ugarit, recording commercial transactions and diplomatic agreements. Writing expands beside trade because memory alone cannot manage increasingly complex economic relationships between growing Bronze Age societies anymore today. At sunset, harbor waters glow softly beneath fading orange light, while fishermen mend nets beside anchored ships creaking gently against wooden piers nearby tonight. Inns fill gradually with travelers discussing weather, caravan routes, and rumors from inland territories. Trade creates fragile cultural understanding between distant societies. Merchants may distrust one another completely, yet mutual dependence still encourages practical cooperation surprisingly well. Far inland beyond Ugarit, caravan roads stretch toward Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Central Asia, through deserts scattered with guarded wells and temporary campsites tonight. Tin remains, scarce enough that even small shipments hold strategic importance throughout Bronze Age economies. Historians often compare ancient trade systems to delicate circulatory networks, sustaining civilization itself across difficult terrain and uncertain political boundaries nearby together. You pause beside one warehouse filled with stacked pottery, jars sealed carefully against moisture, and insects drifting inland from nearby shores tonight. Workers sleep upon woven mats because unloading cargo begins again before sunrise across the harbor district. Though kings receive historical attention more often, ports like Ugarit survive through ordinary routines, repeated patiently beneath changing weather and drifting constellations overhead. Bronze tools and weapons become more reliable gradually, as trade networks stabilize across interconnected regions surrounding the eastern Mediterranean today. Skilled craftsmen combine copper and tin carefully inside furnaces, glowing orange against smoke-darkened workshop walls nearby. The resulting metal proves stronger than earlier copper tools alone. Still, innovation spreads slowly, while most people continue familiar routines beside rivers and coastlines. You notice how geography shapes economic life throughout the Bronze Age world, with quiet but constant authority nearby today. Mountain passes direct caravans, while rivers guide inland transportation and coastal harbors determine maritime trade patterns. Entire cities rise or decline depending upon reliable movement corridors and resource access. Even powerful kingdoms eventually adapt themselves around deserts, storms, rivers, and difficult terrain. As darkness settles across Ugarit, lamps flicker inside counting rooms where scribes record shipments arriving from distant territories nearby tonight. Sailors sleep aboard gently rocking ships while guards patrol warehouse districts beside silent stacks of cargo, awaiting inland transport tomorrow morning. The harbor quiets gradually, except for waves touching stone foundations rhythmically through darkness, beside cool Mediterranean air tonight. Beyond the city, ships continue crossing open waters beneath moonlit skies carrying bronze ingredients. Between islands and coastlines tonight, the Mediterranean becomes not a barrier, but a moving pathway, connecting cultures slowly through commerce and shared necessity across centuries. Trade winds guide vessels patiently onward, while distant lighthouses flicker faintly against dark shores, beside restless waves and uncertain weather nearby always. Far beyond the harbor lights, another caravan approaches along dusty inland roads, carrying precious tin toward waiting workshops and growing kingdoms tonight. Travelers move carefully beneath cold stars, while animals breathe softly into darkness surrounding narrow mountain trails. Ahead, bronze weapons, stronger tools, and wider transformations already begin taking shape inside quiet furnaces, glowing steadily beside sleeping cities beyond distant hills. You travel deeper into a Bronze Age world, growing larger, more connected, and gradually more competitive beneath enormous skies stretching across dusty valleys and open plains. Kingdoms continue exchanging goods peacefully, yet rulers now observe neighboring powers with increasing caution. New military technologies spread slowly through diplomacy, imitation, and curiosity, beside glowing workshops and crowded training grounds throughout expanding territories nearby tonight. At first, bronze weapons remain modest improvements over earlier tools made from stone or copper across ancient societies nearby. Spearheads become sharper, while bronze daggers keep stronger edges through repeated use. Skilled metalworkers experiment carefully with casting methods inside smoky workshops. Technological progress unfolds gradually, much like upgrading kitchen equipment, through several questionable financial decisions somehow today. You begin noticing horses gaining importance across parts of the Near East during the 2nd millennium BCE beneath drifting clouds and harsh sunlight. Earlier civilizations already rely heavily upon oxen and donkeys, yet horses introduce new possibilities involving speed and movement. Trainers care for these animals attentively beside royal stables. Ancient Anatolian manuals even describe conditioning, routines surprisingly similar to modern athletic preparation methods today somehow. Soon, lightweight chariots appear across Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia, gradually transforming military organization over several generations nearby. These vehicles combine horse teams, spoked wheels, bronze weapons, and skilled drivers into highly mobile battlefield systems capable of crossing open terrain rapidly. Chariots demand expensive maintenance and trained crews, becoming symbols of prestige. Ancient rulers apparently discover luxury transportation obsessions long before modern sports cars eventually appear elsewhere. You notice how carefully neighboring kingdoms observe one another during these centuries of slow military adaptation. Across the Bronze Age world, successful innovations spread not only through conquest, but through trade, diplomacy, migration, and imitation between competing courts. Change rarely arrives suddenly here. Instead, new methods emerge gradually beside glowing furnaces, crowded workshops, and patient conversations unfolding beneath endless evening skies above dusty plains tonight. You watch craftsmen assembling. A chariot inside a royal workshop, filled with cedarwood, leather straps, bronze fittings, and balanced wheels shaped carefully for speed across rough terrain. Every piece requires precision, because failure during battle may prove disastrous. Historians believe many chariots carry two men, usually a driver and skilled archer, moving swiftly through battlefield dust together. The composite bow becomes another remarkable innovation during the Bronze Age world. Crafted from layers of wood, horn and sinew glued carefully together, these weapons deliver impressive strength despite compact size. Archers practice constantly to master difficult handling techniques. Ancient instructors probably repeat identical training speeches every morning with remarkable determination and very little sympathy for sleepy recruits nearby. Across wide plains, armies continue marching mostly on foot despite growing admiration. Surrounding chariots and mounted warfare, ordinary soldiers carry bronze spearheads, shields, water jars and supplies beneath drifting dust and relentless sunlight overhead. Archaeologists studying battlefield remains emphasize how deeply logistics shape ancient campaigns. Even powerful kingdoms move only as quickly as food, weather, water, and exhausted bodies allow. You pass through one military camp where rows of tents stand quietly beside grazing horses, tethered near shallow water sources beneath fading afternoon. Light, bronze armor hangs from wooden frames while cooks prepare simple meals over charcoal fires. Soldiers sharpen weapons, repair sandals, and complain softly about travel conditions. One exhausted recruit definitely expected fewer blisters and considerably more heroic music during campaigns. Among the most famous Bronze Age confrontations stands the Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BCE between Egypt under Ramesses II and the Hittite Empire near modern Syria. Historians consider it one of history's largest known chariot battles beneath burning skies and drifting desert dust throughout the region nearby. Yet surviving records describe confusion, shifting momentum, negotiation, and uneasy balance rather than simple victory for either powerful kingdom involved. Egyptian inscriptions celebrate triumph confidently, while Hittite accounts suggest far more complicated outcomes. Ancient warfare often proves messier than royal propaganda prefers admitting publicly beside crowded battlefields and exhausted armies afterward. Egyptian inscriptions carved upon temple walls describe glorious victories with confident certainty, though Hittite records suggest far more complicated outcomes after exhausting campaigns nearby. Modern historians generally conclude the Battle of Kadesh ends without decisive resolution, despite enormous effort from both kingdoms. Across dusty battlefields, soldiers, messengers, and water carriers move beneath oppressive heat, where endurance, discipline, communication, and organized supplies matter more than dramatic heroism alone. Beyond major battles, military technology also influences infrastructure and administration throughout Bronze Age societies nearby today. Kingdoms construct roads, fortifications, storage facilities, and communication systems, supporting armies during long campaigns across difficult terrain. Bronze tools assist engineers repairing walls, building bridges, and expanding transportation routes. The same metal strengthening plows and irrigation systems also shapes weapons carried across distant frontiers. As afternoon light fades across the plains, military movement slows quickly beneath cooling skies and drifting evening winds. Nearby tonight, horses require rest and water, while soldiers gather fuel for cooking fires beside temporary camps. Historians studying ancient warfare repeatedly emphasize how environmental limitations constrain military operations long before modern technology transforms communication and nighttime movement permanently across later centuries worldwide. Inside one officer's tent, scribes record inventories beside maps and sealed grain containers, while administrators carefully manage food, labor, animals, and weapons throughout the camp tonight. Ancient warfare depends heavily upon organized accounting systems, making campaigns resemble traveling economies. Outside beneath bright constellations, horses breathe softly, while exhausted clerks probably deserve more statues afterward somehow. From the camps, rulers discuss alliances, trade agreements, border disputes, and defensive strategies inside palace halls, illuminated by oil lamps tonight. Chariot warfare changes political calculations throughout the Bronze Age because mobility allows faster movement across wider territories. Yet geography, climate, and fragile trade networks continue influencing outcomes as strongly as weapons themselves, beneath patient seasons and slowly moving rivers nearby always. You sit quietly beside the edge of camp, listening to insects hum, through dry grasses beneath drifting stars tonight nearby. A stable worker brushes dust from tired horses standing motionless beside cooling fires and supply carts. Soldiers wrap themselves in blankets against colder desert air, settling gradually after midnight. The world feels suspended between movement, exhaustion, ambition and temporary stillness beneath endless skies. Somewhere beyond the sleeping campfires, other kingdoms quietly observe these changing military systems with growing attention nearby tonight. New methods of warfare spread gradually through imitation, diplomacy, trade, and cautious experimentation across connected regions. Bronze weapons reshape the ancient world, not through sudden transformation, but through countless careful adjustments. Repeated across generations beneath drifting stars and silent roads, stretching endlessly into darkness ahead. You continue northward through landscapes shaped by rocky hills, dry grasslands, and guarded roads winding between strategic settlements beneath pale skies. The Bronze Age world grows increasingly organized as kingdoms expand influence across fertile plains and trade corridors. Defensive walls rise beside caravan routes and river crossings. Human communities now depend increasingly upon fortifications, watchtowers, and carefully planned security systems throughout unstable frontier. Regions nearby today. Ahead, the Hittite capital of Hattusa emerges gradually among rugged hills beneath fading afternoon sunlight. Massive stone walls curve across elevated ridges, while fortified gateways display carved lions and weathered reliefs overlooking distant valleys below. The city appears impressive, yet strangely peaceful. Wind moves gently through dry grass outside the walls, while shepherds guide animals nearby through quiet landscapes tonight. The Hittite Empire becomes one of the major powers of the late Bronze Age, competing diplomatically and militarily with Egypt, Assyria, and neighboring kingdoms throughout Anatolia and Syria. Excavations at Hattusa uncover thousands of clay tablets recording treaties, grain inventories, rituals, and official correspondence preserved carefully beneath collapsed stone, ash, and centuries of drifting soil afterward there quietly. You enter through an enormous gateway where guards inspect travelers and supply wagons, passing beneath thick stone arches into the fortified city tonight. Roads curve upward toward administrative districts, protected by additional defensive walls, layered carefully across higher ground. Hattusa reflects strategic planning developed through generations. Understanding survival depends upon enduring instability without complete political collapse during dangerous periods surrounding neighboring kingdoms nearby. Storage chambers, carved partly into surrounding hills, contain grain reserves. Oil jars, dried foods, and emergency supplies maintained carefully against sieges or failed harvests nearby. Administrators understand cities cannot survive without reliable food distribution during difficult years. You notice how most imperial planning actually involves transportation, storage, and paperwork, rather than dramatic heroism, later celebrated endlessly within monuments and official royal inscriptions afterward somehow everywhere. Within one administrative hall, scribes sit beside low tables pressing cuneiform symbols carefully into wet clay tablets tonight nearby. Records describe diplomatic negotiations involving trade agreements, marriage alliances, and territorial boundaries between rival kingdoms. Historians often emphasize warfare during this period, yet Bronze Age politics depends equally upon negotiation, administration, and carefully managed relationships between powerful states together. One remarkable document discovered within Hittite archives preserves the peace treaty negotiated with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh nearby. Copies appear in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform, revealing advanced diplomatic practices between rival empires. The agreement includes mutual defense clauses, proving even ancient superpowers eventually recognize cooperation. Sometimes costs less than endless warfare. Outside palace districts, ordinary neighborhoods spread across lower hillsides, where families live within clustered stone and mud brick homes together nearby. Narrow streets conserve valuable space inside defensive walls, protecting the city from uncertainty beyond. Residents store grain, oil, and dried foods carefully against difficult seasons ahead. Civilization adapts quietly to militarization through practical routines rather than constant fear surrounding daily life. You walk through one courtyard where bronze swords hang beside farming tools, woven baskets, and cooking pots inside the same household space tonight nearby. A child sleeps peacefully near the wall while bread bakes slowly inside a clay oven, glowing softly with coals. Weapons become ordinary objects throughout Bronze Age societies, existing beside domestic routines and familiar responsibilities every day. Bronze technology continues improving construction, transportation, and woodworking throughout expanding kingdoms linked by growing political authority nearby. Builders use bronze chisels, saws, and axes, shaping timber supports and strengthening defensive structures, protecting important settlements. Roads connecting fortified cities receive careful maintenance because reliable communication becomes essential for administration, trade, military coordination, and the movement of information across territories. As evening approaches, cool winds drift down from surrounding hills, carrying scents of dry grass and distant cooking fires beyond city walls tonight. Traders arriving late hurry toward guarded entrances before gates close until sunrise. Caravan animals rest beside storage yards, while officials inspect cargo records beneath flickering torchlight and fading skies, growing steadily darker overhead through gathering nightfall nearby. Somewhere beside the crowded gate, one exhausted merchant absolutely insists his paperwork disappeared because of unexpected donkey-related complications during the journey tonight nearby. Officials remain politely unconvinced while scribes continue checking inventories beside loaded wagons and restless animals. Bureaucratic confusion apparently survives every civilization remarkably well, no matter how impressive surrounding fortresses, treaties, or political systems eventually become afterward somehow. Throughout Hittite territory, administration quietly supports military power through taxes, maintaining roads, granaries, workshops, and frontier garrisons across expanding lands nearby. At night, guards patrol towering walls beneath flickering lamps, while caravan routes vanish into uncertain darkness. Beyond, inside the city, ordinary routines continue peacefully as bakers prepare bread and families exchange neighborhood rumors beside evening fires tonight. You pause beside an elevated section of wall overlooking rolling hills, fading gradually into darkness beneath scattered stars overhead tonight. Wind moves softly through dry grasses, surrounding abandoned outer structures damaged slowly by weather and time. Archaeologists later uncover evidence showing Hattusa eventually suffers destruction during the wider Bronze Age collapse. Yet tonight, the city still breathes steadily beneath moonlit skies. Far from royal courts, smaller frontier settlements adapt carefully to uncertain political conditions, spreading gradually across the eastern Mediterranean nearby. Villagers reinforce gates, strengthen storage rooms, and maintain closer ties with neighboring communities as migration patterns slowly shift. Human societies often respond to instability, not through panic, but through preparation, adjustment, and cooperation, repeated patiently across generations together. You notice how landscapes themselves begin carrying signs of growing movement and uncertainty throughout interconnected Bronze Age territories nearby. Coastal routes become busier, while inland roads require fortified checkpoints and additional patrols between rival powers. Historians describe these kingdoms balancing delicately between prosperity and vulnerability, like an enormous woven net, remaining strong only while important connections continue holding together securely. Late into the night, the city quiets beneath cool Anatolian skies, while guards continue watching distant roads from silent towers nearby. Horses sleep inside sheltered stables beside grain reserves and carefully maintained supply rooms. Somewhere beyond the hills, Travelers still move beneath moonlight carrying copper, tin, timber and rumors between kingdoms rarely understanding one another completely despite constant contact through commerce. As wind brushes gently across abandoned walls near the sleeping city's outer edge tonight, your attention slowly turns toward distant coastlines where ships cross dark waters beneath unfamiliar stars. Beyond those shores, migrations and disruptions already begin reshaping the eastern Mediterranean quietly. The Bronze Age world still appears stable tonight, though its foundations have already started shifting silently beneath time itself. You enter a quieter chapter of the Bronze Age world, where long-established kingdoms begin facing pressures difficult to fully understand today. Trade networks still connect cities, ports and caravan routes across wide regions, yet subtle instability spreads beneath familiar routines. Harvests weaken gradually, while political alliances loosen softly, like old rope fraying beneath steady pressure over many seasons together nearby. Across the eastern Mediterranean, ships continue crossing between islands and coastal settlements beneath bright skies and familiar constellations tonight. Yet merchants and sailors begin noticing difficult changes surrounding trade and travel. Certain harbors grow quieter, while shipments arrive late or disappear entirely. Travelers speak cautiously about unrest spreading beyond distant routes and neighboring kingdoms nearby together slowly today. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions from the reign of Ramesses III describe migrating groups later called the Sea Peoples by modern historians today. These records mention maritime conflicts and displaced populations moving through Mediterranean regions during the 12th century BCE. Historians still debate exactly who these groups were, suggesting complicated migration patterns rather than simple invasion stories afterward everywhere. You stand beside a quiet harbor where fishing boats rock gently against weathered wooden docks beneath fading sunlight tonight. Nearby warehouses remain partly filled, though trade traffic appears lighter than during earlier generations. Merchants exchange goods cautiously, while officials record shipments beside shoreline offices. One exhausted dockworker probably blames every delayed cargo delivery upon administrative confusion, again somehow there today nearby. Modern climate studies examining pollen samples, sediment layers, and ancient lake levels suggest prolonged drought conditions affect parts of the eastern Mediterranean during this period nearby. Reduced rainfall likely strains agricultural systems already dependent upon reliable harvest cycles and interconnected trade networks. Food shortages rarely remain isolated problems. Once political pressure spreads gradually through markets, migration, taxation, and unrest together silently afterward. You travel inland through dry fields where farmers continue working carefully, despite increasingly uncertain seasonal conditions surrounding their communities nearby. Irrigation canals require greater maintenance, while wells stand lower than older generations remember from earlier years. Yet ordinary life persists steadily. Families repair homes, store grain, and tend livestock beneath pale skies carrying noticeably less rain than before across regions today. In several major Bronze Age centers, archaeologists uncover burned destruction layers buried beneath collapsed walls, shattered pottery, and abandoned administrative buildings nearby. Cities including Ugarit show evidence of sudden disruption during this era. One unfinished clay tablet appears describing enemy ships approaching the coastline shortly before destruction interrupts routine bureaucratic procedures forever afterward. There, sadly today somehow, yet not every settlement disappears entirely beneath violence or political collapse throughout the eastern Mediterranean world nearby together. Rural communities often continue farming, fishing, and trading with quieter continuity despite instability surrounding larger urban centers. Historians increasingly emphasize this collapse unfolds unevenly across regions, rather than through one catastrophic event, destroying everything simultaneously afterward, somehow across neighboring kingdoms over time. You notice how vulnerable Interconnected trade systems become once enough. Pressures accumulate across multiple regions, simultaneously during difficult decades nearby today. Tin shipments slow, while maritime routes grow less predictable beneath changing political conditions. Palace administrations struggle maintaining authority once communication weakens between territories. Even powerful kingdoms begin losing stability, quietly beneath outward displays of royal confidence and ceremony afterward together. At dusk, smoke rises faintly from one partially abandoned coastal settlement where surviving families continue living among damaged buildings and fallen walls. Nearby tonight, children gather driftwood beside dark shorelines, while older residents repair fishing nets beneath fading light. The atmosphere feels subdued rather than chaotic. Human communities gradually normalize uncertainty through routines repeated carefully. Across difficult seasons together afterward, somehow there, you walk beside collapsed harbor structures where broken pottery lies, scattered among reeds growing through cracked foundations and buried pathways nearby today. Archaeologists excavating similar sites often uncover ash layers preserved beneath centuries of accumulated soil and vegetation. Yet nature softens destruction gradually. Grass spreads through ruins, while wind smooths fractured stone beside abandoned. Ghost lines over generations afterward together silently there. Far across the Mediterranean, displaced groups continue moving between coastlines, seeking farmland, stability, employment, or political opportunity within changing regional conditions nearby today together. Migration remains difficult to reconstruct clearly because surviving records often describe outsiders vaguely and suspiciously. Historians increasingly caution against simplistic explanations involving singular invading peoples responsible for widespread Bronze Age disruption afterward everywhere somehow. The sea remains beautiful, despite uncertainty surrounding coastal trade and weakening political alliances throughout interconnected regions nearby tonight together. Moonlight reflects softly across dark water while waves touch damaged piers with steady rhythm beneath cool winds. Sailors continue navigating between islands guided by stars and inherited knowledge passed carefully through generations. Despite changing historical conditions afterward, there peacefully, you rest beside a small fishing village where residents share modest evening meals of bread, olives, and salted fish beside quiet fires tonight. Stories drift gently between households, about vanished ports, distant wars, and rulers nobody fully trusts anymore. Yet children still laugh while chasing one another along shorelines. Ordinary life survives remarkably well beneath uncertainty, through familiar daily routines nearby together afterward. Inland courts and royal palaces meanwhile struggle maintaining systems dependent upon tribute, trade, and centralized authority across wide territories nearby today. Administrative records become scarcer after this period within several regions, suggesting disruptions inside bureaucratic institutions themselves. Historians sometimes compare the late Bronze Age collapse to interconnected systems failure rather than singular conquest afterward across neighboring kingdoms together silently somehow. As midnight deepens, you stand beside dark marshlands where fragments of broken ships rest partially submerged among reeds and shallow water nearby tonight. Some vessels likely sink during storms, while others disappear through conflict or abandonment near unstable ports. The silence surrounding these wrecks feels peaceful rather than tragic, beneath constellations reflected softly across calm coastal waters afterward together there silently. Beyond ruined harbors and weakened courts, survivors continue rebuilding. Modest lives from available materials and fading memories of stronger kingdoms, once dominating nearby coastlines today. Stone foundations become shelters again, while fishing resumes beside cautious local trade exchanges. History rarely ends completely. People adapt quietly beneath altered conditions, shaped partly by resilience and simple necessity afterward, across generations together, silently. Along distant eastern Mediterranean shorelines, cool wind moves softly through reeds beside abandoned Docks and dark water beneath endless stars tonight. Great courts grow quieter, while trade routes narrow gradually beneath drought, migration and time. Yet small fires still glow beside humble homes, where human voices continue softly through. The long unfolding night beyond the sea, together nearby afterward. You continue forward through a quieter world now, reshaped slowly after the weakening of Bronze Age kingdoms across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Grand palaces stand partially abandoned, while trade routes carry fewer caravans beneath. Drifting clouds, rivers still flow steadily past ruined walls, and small communities adapt patiently through loss and resilience. Across changing landscapes, people continue rebuilding in small, steady ways. Life does not vanish, but becomes more localized and careful, shaped by necessity rather than empire. Villages remain active beside rivers and fields, where survival depends on cooperation, memory, and the gradual adjustment to a world no longer unified by great kingdoms. In earlier centuries, bronze dominates tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. Across interconnected kingdoms, dependent on copper and scarce tin, moving through fragile trade systems. As those networks weaken, societies gradually turn toward iron. The transition is slow. Early iron tools remain brittle and difficult to forge, requiring repeated experimentation by metalworkers in smoky workshops filled with trial and error. Unlike tin, iron ore exists widely across many regions, making it more accessible despite early technological challenges. Smelting iron demands higher temperatures and refined techniques. Communities no longer rely entirely on long-distance trade routes. Instead, localized production develops near ore deposits. Economic systems become more regional and flexible, reducing dependence on centralized palace administrations controlling vast interconnected networks. You pass through a former administrative center where courtyards lie silent beneath pale afternoon light. Grass grows between cracked paving stones, while wind moves through roofless storage halls once filled with grain records and imported goods. Archaeologists find evidence of abandonment and reuse. Human societies rarely erase history completely, often rebuilding or reusing older structures when shelter remains available nearby. Inside a partially collapsed workshop, blackened furnace remains reveal continued ironworking after palace systems disappear. Craftsmen experiment despite inconsistent results and limited resources. Iron requires different techniques than bronze, demanding higher heat and careful forging. Technological change unfolds gradually through persistence, not sudden breakthroughs, driven by repeated trial, error, and acceptance of imperfect but functional outcomes in daily production. You enter a nearby village where life continues steadily despite broader regional disruption. Women weave cloth in shaded courtyards, while farmers repair irrigation channels leading to fields beyond stone walls. Children carry water jars along dusty paths. Archaeology shows domestic routines survive longer than political institutions, continuing quietly even as kingdoms weaken or disappear across shifting historical conditions over time. Bronze tools remain common because they continue functioning long after trade networks weaken. Iron does not immediately replace bronze. Instead, both coexist across long transitional periods shaped by local resources and craftsmanship. Technological change varies by region. Some communities adopt iron early, while others continue bronze traditions for generations, showing uneven and gradual transformation across interconnected societies. At sunset, smoke rises from clay ovens, where bread bakes beside homes built from reused stone. Recycling becomes practical as large supply systems decline. Nothing feels dramatic. People adapt through daily choices involving tools, shelter, and survival. Even during instability, life continues quietly. Someone still worries more about roof repairs than historical transformations unfolding beyond ordinary household concerns. Rivers remain largely unchanged despite shifting political and technological landscapes. Water nourishes fields while reeds move beside marshes beneath. Migrating birds, Nature absorbs human transitions patiently. Ruins soften under vegetation, while pathways fade into soil and grass. Geological time moves differently than political time, carrying civilizations slowly forward like leaves drifting across wide, silent currents beyond human control. You walk through fields where farmers use bronze sickles, iron knives, and wooden tools repaired over time. Material culture is practical rather than rigid. People use whatever works locally. Technological change rarely happens suddenly. Instead, it emerges through gradual adaptation, experimentation, and necessity, not official declarations marking the beginning of entirely new historical eras across continents overnight together. Farther north in mountain valleys, small ironworking communities develop near ore sources. Production becomes decentralized compared to bronze systems dependent on tin trade. This shift changes political organization as regional powers gain access to materials without distant alliances. Economic flexibility quietly reshapes authority structures beneath everyday life, strengthening smaller communities across dispersed settlements and rural landscapes gradually. You pause beside a village forge where sparks rise into cool evening air. A blacksmith hammers glowing iron rhythmically on stone. The sound is steady and calm. Metallurgy requires patience, heat control, and skill. Yet it feels ordinary, not revolutionary. New technologies usually enter daily life quietly, blending into familiar routines rather than replacing them abruptly within moments. In former palace regions, populations shift towards smaller rural settlements. Archaeology shows modest farming communities growing while cities decline. Human societies reorganize rather than vanish. When centralized systems weaken, smaller networks continue functioning with surprising resilience. Adaptation replaces restoration, allowing life to continue under reduced complexity and new forms of local cooperation across recovering landscapes. Night falls across valleys where abandoned fortifications stand beneath moonlight and vegetation. Owls move through broken towers while wind passes through empty halls. Nearby villages remain alive with fires and conversation. The end of empires rarely brings silence. Instead, activity shifts to smaller scales, carried through domestic spaces where ordinary life continues, despite changing historical conditions nearby tonight. Memory changes during these transitions. Stories of older kingdoms survive as fragments, passed between generations. Younger people grow up among ruins that feel normal rather than symbolic. Humans adapt emotionally to change, especially when survival depends on daily routines like farming, repairing tools, and maintaining homes, continuing life even as larger historical structures slowly disappear into background time. Along distant roads, merchants travel between scattered settlements, carrying salt, cloth, livestock, and metals. Trade never disappears completely but becomes more local. Small marketplaces emerge at crossroads and rivers. Even difficult centuries contain movement and cooperation. Exchange persists quietly beneath historical disruption, sustaining connections between communities through practical necessity and modest but enduring economic relationships. At midnight, rain falls across abandoned courtyards where vegetation grows through stone. Water gathers in old drainage systems, still functioning imperfectly. Nature slowly reclaims built environments. The ancient world softens under moss and soil. Nearby, a forge still glows faintly as iron cools under careful hands, continuing quiet production even as darkness settles across forgotten architectural spaces. Beyond valleys and ruins beneath stars, new societies form from fragments of bronze. Age worlds. Iron tools spread gradually among villages and emerging kingdoms. Rivers flow unchanged past abandoned halls. Though palace networks fade, human life persists through fields, workshops, and hearths, carrying memory forward beneath patient skies and the endless movement of distant constellations above the earth. You move now through a world rebuilding itself slowly from the scattered remains of older Bronze Age systems once stretching across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Palace administrations have weakened or vanished in many regions, yet Communities adapt beneath shifting conditions. Smaller kingdoms rise among ruins, carrying fragments of older traditions forward, like embers sheltered from cold winds across uncertain landscapes tonight. In the Levant and Anatolia, new societies emerge not by discarding the past, but by reshaping inherited knowledge into flexible forms suited to changing realities. Languages blend through trade and migration, while artistic styles borrow from neighbors. Religious practices also evolve gradually. Civilization rarely restarts completely. Instead, it rearranges older elements repeatedly, like households reorganizing belongings during long, uncertain renovations throughout history. You travel through a coastal settlement where stone houses cluster beside narrow streets leading toward a sheltered harbor filled with fishing boats and merchant vessels. Market stalls display pottery, cloth, ivory, and imported oils. Political boundaries shift often, yet commerce continues connecting regions. Merchants preserve continuity more effectively than rulers because trade relies on relationships that outlast individual dynasties across generations. Among emerging maritime peoples, Phoenician coastal societies become influential traders across the Mediterranean. Their sailors transport timber, purple dye, glass, metals, and crafted goods between ports from the Levant to North Africa, Cyprus, Sicily, and Iberia. These ships function as moving corridors of exchange, carrying languages, technologies, and artistic traditions quietly between distant communities beneath shifting political landscapes. One major contribution associated with Phoenician culture is the spread of alphabetic writing systems through trade networks. Earlier, scripts required extensive training and hundreds of symbols, but alphabets reduce complexity by representing sounds with fewer characters. This innovation expands literacy within commerce. Somewhere in antiquity, a weary merchant likely celebrates after encountering paperwork with fewer complicated symbols during accounting tasks. You stand beside a harbor at sunset, watching sailors unload amphorae of oil and wine while lanterns reflect on calm water and weathered hulls. Warehouses hold goods arriving from multiple regions, linked by recovering maritime routes. The atmosphere is quieter than imperial ports, but more flexible. Smaller networks replace centralized systems gradually, allowing trade to continue even as kingdoms weaken nearby. Archaeological evidence from post-collapse societies shows surprising continuity beneath political change. Pottery styles evolve gradually rather than disappearing. Metallurgy spreads between workshops, and farming practices remains stable across generations. Human culture behaves like overlapping currents rather than replacement waves. Even disrupted societies preserve memory through tools, habits, and shared knowledge carried quietly between communities across changing historical conditions. A key example of Bronze Age interconnectedness appears in the Uluburun shipwreck near modern Turkey. Archaeologists recovered copper and tin ingots, ivory, glass beads, jewelry, ebony, ceramics, and luxury goods from multiple regions. The ship demonstrates how deeply interconnected trade networks once were, linking distant cultures through maritime exchange across vast and fragile systems operating beneath shared seas. You imagine the vessel during its final voyage moving across open water under shifting winds. Sailors manage sails, while merchants guard cargo below deck. Each object represents connections between distant societies, exchanging resources and ideas. Ancient globalization unfolds through such ships, dependent on weather, navigation, and cooperation, forming early networks of exchange long before modern systems of international trade. The Uluburun cargo also shows that trade networks persisted. Even after political collapse weakened palace economies. Merchants continued traveling, craftsmen produced goods, and families migrated between regions. Culture survived through movement and exchange rather than central authority. Human continuity depends on sailors, traders, artisans, and households, adapting steadily beneath uncertainty rather than on rulers alone across historical disruption. Far inland, smaller kingdoms form along caravan routes linking valleys, plains, and coastal ports. Leaders govern modest territories but maintain flexible administration. Communities repair irrigation systems, rebuild markets, and negotiate alliances under shifting power. Political fragmentation does not always cause isolation. It can encourage regional identities developing side by side across recovering landscapes with cooperation and cautious diplomacy. You pass through a hilltop settlement where builders reuse stones from abandoned Bronze Age structures. Massive blocks once supporting palaces now reinforce smaller walls and homes. The past becomes part of the present landscape. Archaeology shows this reuse repeatedly, as practical communities value materials for survival rather than preserving ruins purely for memory or symbolic historical significance across time. At dusk, musicians play softly in a harbour tavern while sailors share stories under oil lamps, reflecting on pottery and wood. Conversations mix multiple languages shaped by trade and migration. Cultural blending feels natural here. Coastal societies become crossroads where identities remain fluid, shaped through commerce, intermarriage, and repeated contact beneath. Shared stars, mirrored across calm water tonight peacefully. The sea continues connecting societies despite earlier Bronze Age disruptions. Maritime routes shift as ports rise and fall. Sailors memorize currents, winds, and coastlines guiding travel between islands and shores. Even small fishing villages remain linked through passing merchants. Human communities rarely remain isolated when navigable waters provide continuous opportunities for exchange, movement, and communication across regions over time. You walk through storage courtyards where workers stack amphorae under protective coverings against rain and salt air. Bronze objects still circulate widely even as iron spreads elsewhere. Older technologies persist alongside new ones. Practical societies adopt innovations gradually, integrating them into daily life. History unfolds through overlap and continuity, more than sudden replacement, despite later attempts to simplify its periods. Late in the evening, harbour waters remain smooth under moonlight, while anchored ships creak softly against worn wooden piers. Lanterns glow along narrow streets where distant voices drift between homes and taverns. The scene is neither tragic nor triumphant. Civilization rebuilds quietly from inherited fragments, reshaping memory into new forms while maintaining familiar rhythms beneath changing political and environmental conditions tonight. Beyond the harbour, the sea stretches under constellations, guiding sailors across darkness toward unseen ports. Trade winds fill sails, while cargo shifts below deck beside resting crews. Along distant routes, families migrate, carrying languages, technologies, and traditions from fading Bronze Age worlds. These movements preserve continuity, transforming old civilizations gradually into memory, archaeology, and enduring cultural echoes over centuries. Along the shoreline, lantern reflections tremble across calm water beside weathered hulls as night settles over rebuilding kingdoms. Waves touch stone docks while voices fade into darkness. The Bronze Age world has changed and fragmented, yet human connection persists through harbours, valleys, and settlements beneath endless stars, sustained by exchange, memory, and the steady rhythm of the sea tonight. You move through landscapes where centuries settle gently across remnants of Bronze Age cities, once alive with merchants, priests, and rulers beneath bright skies. Time does not erase these places but softens them, as sand fills courtyards and grass grows through fractured stone. Older worlds persist beneath newer roads, homes, temples, and fields, shaped by later generations living onward together. Many ancient cities disappear slowly beneath soil, flood deposits, collapsed walls, and cycles of rebuilding across centuries. Yet traces remain in buried archives, carved stones, pottery fragments, and stories passed between generations. Archaeology is more listening than finding, a patient attention to layers of time rather than treasure hunting, revealing quieter realities than adventure tales usually suggest in modern imagination. You arrive at Mycenae, where massive stone gateways still stand centuries after palace power fades. Huge limestone blocks form defensive walls overlooking dry hills. Later, Greeks imagined giants built them because scale seems impossible for ordinary people. Memory transforms, engineering into myth when knowledge fades, and impressive construction becomes legend rather than practical human achievement preserved in oral tradition there. The Lion Gate remains striking in quiet afternoon light. Two carved lions face each other above entrance, while weathered steps lead into ruined courtyards and collapsed palace spaces. Wind crosses hilltop carrying dry grass and olive scent. Though kingdoms vanished long ago, architecture still shapes landscape and imagination, surviving beliefs and rulers that once created it across centuries beyond. Farther east in Mesopotamia, temple foundations support newer structures built repeatedly upon sacred sites across centuries. Cities rise and fall beside shifting rivers across fertile plains. Excavations reveal stacked civilizations beneath modern ground. Settlement behaves like sediment, accumulating memory through construction, destruction, repair, abandonment, and return, forming deep-layered histories shaped by human continuity and environmental change over time itself. You descend into an excavation trench, where mud-brick walls emerge from soil under protective coverings. Archaeologists brush pottery fragments and record notes carefully. Ordinary objects reveal more than monuments alone. A cooking bowl can preserve history more honestly than royal inscriptions. Every fragment becomes evidence, turning daily life into a patient record of human existence across forgotten centuries over time. One discovery involves fingerprints preserved in dried mud bricks shaped thousands of years ago by unknown workers. These impressions remain beneath collapsed walls and soil long after names and borders vanish. You imagine someone pressing clay without knowing their touch would survive millennia. Human presence endures through accidental traces rather than monuments built intentionally to resist time itself in silence now. Wear marks on ancient thresholds reveal repeated movements of people carrying water jars, grain, and tools through familiar spaces. Historians reconstruct daily life from such traces rather than royal records alone. Civilization is built from ordinary actions repeated across generations. Most history unfolds quietly between homes, workshops, and markets beneath changing seasons, and shifting skies everywhere around them continually onward. Archaeologists piece together broken pottery on excavation tables like slow puzzles shaped by time. Many vessels show signs of ancient repair, proving objects were valued long enough to restore rather than discard. Bronze Age households appear practical and resourceful. Even then, people insist broken items remain usable despite flaws, reflecting familiar attitudes toward repair, scarcity, and careful household economy there. In museums, bronze weapons that once symbolized power now rest behind glass under quiet lighting. Oxidation softens their surfaces and dulls sharp edges once used. In battle, visitors walk past reading labels about forgotten kingdoms. Objects once carried into war become silent artifacts, observed calmly by later generations, who study history rather than participate in it directly anymore at all. Night settles over ruined settlements where insects hum through grasses growing. Between collapsed walls, the atmosphere feels calm rather than tragic. Nature slowly incorporates architecture into ecological cycles of rain, roots, and weathering stone. Archaeological sites reveal continuity between past and present. Human concerns like shelter, food, and memory remain recognizable across vast spans of time everywhere across generations here. You walk through an abandoned courtyard where moonlight touches broken columns and pottery buried beneath soil and vegetation. Beneath your feet lie deeper layers containing tools, jars, bones, and records waiting in darkness. Archaeology reveals vast unseen history underground. The earth functions as a slow archive, preserving fragments beneath centuries of silence and patient geological movement always continuing through time. At temple sites, later builders reuse older foundation stones from abandoned Bronze Age structures. Massive carved blocks, once supporting palaces, now strengthen smaller homes and walls. The past becomes part of the present landscape. Human societies inherit places shaped by earlier generations and adapt them continuously. Modern cities also rest upon countless invisible layers of reconstruction and reuse over time. Archaeology shifts historical understanding toward material evidence and patient reconstruction. A worn floor shows movement, seeds reveal diet, hooks suggest fishing economies. Small discoveries build broader knowledge gradually. History emerges not from single revelation but from many observations connected over time. Scholars assemble fragments carefully, creating interpretations of ancient life grounded in physical traces rather than heroic narratives themselves. Far from museums, ancient ruins remain beneath open skies where shepherds guide animals across forgotten foundations. Pottery fragments appear after rain, while walls blend into hillsides and farmland. The boundary between past and present feels thin. Ancient worlds persist within modern landscapes. They do not vanish, but remain hidden beneath everyday life, still shaping ground and memory quietly over time. Midnight settles over abandoned courtyards where insects move through grass between broken stone. Silence feels calm rather than empty. Human ambition once filled these spaces with ritual, labor, and authority. Now wind moves freely through weathered halls shaped by centuries of rain and sun beneath stars. The ruins reflect continuity between human presence and slow natural transformation, always continuing here. You stand beside an ancient stairway worn smooth by countless feet. Beneath layers of earth lie rooms, objects, and records preserved in darkness awaiting discovery. Time continues settling across everything. Empires fade, buildings collapse, yet traces endure through fingerprints, pottery, and pathways shaped by human movement beneath shifting skies, and long cycles of seasons and memory persist beyond all time. Across sleeping ruins of Bronze Age worlds softened by grass, wind, insects, and centuries of weathering, night stretches. Beneath stars, excavation trenches rest until morning while museum halls grow silent. Somewhere distant, forgotten layers of history remain buried beneath soil and stone. Ancient voices fade into fragments, echoes, and memory while time continues. Breathing gently through abandoned landscapes tonight here, you move into the quietest part of the journey, where the Bronze Age world dissolves into broader patterns of climate, geography, and deep geological time. Human history begins to look less like isolated empires in conflict and more like interconnected systems slowly responding to environmental shifts. Civilizations rise and fall within larger natural cycles that continue far beyond any single kingdom or ruler across centuries together. Researchers studying sediment cores from lakes, marshes, and riverbeds reconstruct ancient climates stretching thousands of years into the past. Layers of mud preserve pollen grains that reveal shifting vegetation across Bronze Age landscapes. Wet periods support agriculture and marshlands, while drought transforms fertile regions into harsher environments. The Earth records these changes silently, without headings or summaries, only layers accumulating patiently through time. In modern laboratories, scientists analyze microscopic traces preserved in ancient bones, teeth, and plant remains. Isotopes reveal migration patterns, diets, rainfall changes, and agricultural stress invisible in written records. Climate and geography emerge as powerful forces shaping political systems. Kingdoms depend on organization, but also on water, harvests, and ecological stability that quietly determine survival beneath every human ambition and structure. Satellite imaging now uncovers buried rivers, forgotten settlements, and ancient irrigation systems hidden beneath deserts and farmland. Entire trade routes reappear as faint patterns in soil and vegetation. Technology reveals landscapes once shaping civilization without notice. What seemed lost often remains beneath the surface, waiting quietly for tools capable of reading the slow signatures left behind by ancient human movement across terrain. You stand on a low mound where a Bronze Age city once thrived beside trade routes and crowded markets. Today it appears empty, marked only by scattered pottery and uneven soil. Shepherds pass without noticing its depth. Wind moves over buried walls and forgotten courtyards. Human ambition fades into subtle traces as centuries of erosion smooth the surface of once busy urban life. Many ancient capitals survive today as tells, layered mounds built from repeated cycles of settlement and abandonment. Beneath them lie stacked civilizations sharing the same geographic advantages of water, fertile soil, and trade access. Geography outlasts political systems. Rivers and coastlines continue guiding human settlement long after empires disappear, shaping where people return, rebuild, and reorganize across long spans of time. You kneel beside collapsed mud brick walls, softened by rain and roots. The structure, once held homes, storage rooms, or offices filled with daily activity, now gone. Nearby excavations uncover small objects untouched for millennia. Beads, tools, seeds, and bones preserve ordinary lives more clearly than royal monuments. Everyday fragments often become the most honest record of human existence across forgotten centuries. Modern historians increasingly view ancient societies as interconnected systems shaped by climate stress, migration, disease, and resource shifts. The late Bronze Age collapse appears less like sudden disaster and more like overlapping pressures spreading through fragile networks. Civilizations resemble ecosystems, resilient until too many connections weaken at once. Stability depends on balance across many quiet factors, rather than single causes or events. You walk through dry grass covering buried foundations, while insects hum under warm light. The scene feels calm rather than tragic. Human history is only a thin layer on a much older planet. Mountains rise and erode, rivers shift course, and coastlines change continuously. Civilizations appear briefly on the surface of geological time, while natural systems continue moving beneath them steadily. Research into ancient disease suggests epidemics may have contributed to instability during transitional periods. Trade routes and migration corridors spread both goods and illness across regions. Evidence is incomplete due to fragile biological preservation. Historians remain cautious as ancient complexity resists simple explanations, revealing deep links between environment, movement, and human vulnerability. At sunset, wind moves across abandoned hilltops where pottery fragments glint among stones and vegetation. Birds circle above fading light while shadows stretch over hidden chambers. Silence feels vast but not empty. Ancient lives once filled these spaces completely. Now only traces remain, while the earth continues its slow cycles of weather, erosion, and renewal across landscapes shaped by time itself. Archaeology increasingly depends on collaboration between many sciences. Geologists, chemists, botanists, climate experts, and imaging specialists work together to reconstruct ancient worlds. Understanding the past becomes careful interpretation rather than certainty. Even pollen analysis can take years of study. Behind every discovery lies patient effort, revealing how deeply human history depends on invisible traces preserved across multiple natural systems and disciplines. Beneath the surface, sealed chambers preserve fragile objects untouched for thousands of years. Textiles, wooden tools, and written fragments survive in rare conditions. These finds feel intimate rather than grand. A child's footprint or fingerprint in clay often carries more emotional weight than monumental architecture. Small traces preserve presence more directly than structures built to express power or authority across kingdoms. At dusk, shepherds guide animals across plains once home to powerful cities and empires. Daily rhythms continue despite political change. Food, movement, labor, and shelter remain constant across generations. Civilization changes, but life repeats in familiar cycles. The planet carries human activity gently forward, while nature measures time through erosion, sediment, rainfall, and slow biological adaptation across vast stretches of history. You rest beside a river under emerging stars reflected on dark water. Upstream, ancient canals once carried irrigation across fertile fields supporting large populations. Now only faint traces remain, yet the river continues flowing as it always has. Civilizations come and go, but water systems persist, shaping settlement long before empires and continuing long after their disappearance beneath soil and memory. As thought expands outward, human conflict appears small against geological and ecological time. Empires rise briefly, then fade into archaeology and myth. Meanwhile, tectonic plates shift, oceans circulate, and climate systems move across continents. History becomes one rhythm among many, nested within deeper planetary cycles that operate continuously beyond human awareness, shaping environments in ways no civilization can fully control. Night settles across Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, once linked by bronze, trade, and migration. Wind smooths abandoned walls, while underground chambers preserve fragments of lost lives. The silence feels vast yet calm. Civilizations have passed through here many times, but the Earth remains far older, continuing its own slow processes beneath every human story ever recorded. Under a sky filled with stars, above buried cities and forgotten roads, the world grows even quieter. Rivers move through darkness, and cool air drifts across plains once filled with markets and temples. Human ambition fades into the planet's broader rhythm. Beyond empire and memory, the Earth continues breathing steadily, carrying time forward beneath night that never truly ends. You arrive at the final quiet horizon of the Bronze Age world, where centuries of movement, invention, conflict, and adaptation settle into the stillness of the Earth beneath endless stars. What began beside small fires of early metalworkers does not end suddenly, but fades through gradual transformation across rivers, coastlines, mountains, and plains, stretching far beyond any single human lifetime, together tonight. The Bronze Age reshapes civilization over thousands of years. Weapons change kingdoms, trade redirects wealth, and cities rise beside rivers before fading into dust and grass. Yet nature continues its older rhythms beyond human control. Floods return, winds cross deserts, and stars rise above the same horizons watched by countless generations, separated by language, empire, and memory across deep time. You begin to see how slowly history unfolds for those living within it. A blacksmith improves one tool, merchants shift routes after shortages, families move gradually towards safer land. No one witnesses a sudden new age. Instead, life continues as connected ordinary days, forming long rivers of change too slow to recognize from within their own current flow nearby today. Far from palaces and wars, most people still wake before sunrise to grind grain, tend animals, repair homes, and carry water along familiar paths. Even during what later seems like collapse, routines persist across households. Civilization survives through repetition. Someone always worries more about storage jars than empires, because daily survival remains the most constant concern across centuries everywhere. You stand beside an ancient riverbank where reeds sway under constellations reflected in dark water. Farmers once carved irrigation channels here with bronze tools beneath these same stars. Later, temples and palaces rose nearby before time softened them into low mounds. Earth slowly covers human effort, returning structures to soil across centuries of drifting grass and silence. Geological time stretches far beyond human kingdoms and their brief histories. Mountains rise and slowly erode, rivers shift course. Across continents and coastlines move under changing climates over vast durations. Against such immense scales, empires appear as fleeting surface patterns, quickly forming and fading while natural processes continue shaping the planet continuously over time itself. The Bronze Age becomes only a brief moment within planetary History, yet its influence continues echoing through later societies, technologies, and collective memories carried forward across civilizations long after its disappearance. Human developments persist in layered forms, shaping future cultures even when their original contexts fade beneath changing historical and environmental conditions over deep time. Modern researchers uncover these worlds through excavation, satellite, imaging, and climate analysis. Yet every discovery reveals how much remains unknown. History feels like a partially heard conversation across distance. Fragments survive while countless voices vanish. The silence between findings carries meaning too, reminding us that most of the past exists beyond what can ever be recovered again. Across Mesopotamian plains tonight, wind passes over buried walls, where workshops and homes once glowed with furnace light. Insects hum above ancient canals, cut by unknown hands. Stars above remain unchanged since Bronze Age workers watched embers fade. The sky connects past and present, unchanged, while human lives pass briefly beneath its steady, distant patterns overhead always. You imagine a bronze smith resting outside his workshop, listening to wind and distant water while tools cool beside him. He cannot know future empires, museums, or archaeology. He simply exists within his night. Yet his small moment becomes part of a longer chain of human presence, quietly preserved through time without intention or awareness of lasting beyond himself. Across the Mediterranean, abandoned harbors lie under moonlight where ships once carried copper, tin, grain, and stories between civilizations. Waves still touch ancient docks worn by centuries. Fishing villages replace palace ports. Coastlines remain constant in their slow dialogue with tides. Human trade changes shape, but the sea continues connecting distant shores beneath repeating. Stars overhead always. You walk through imagined ruins softened by grass, rain, and silence. Walls collapse into hills, pottery sinks into soil, and roots weave through forgotten rooms. Nothing disappears instantly. Materials change, stories fragment, and cities return slowly to landscape. What once stood as civilization becomes part of Earth again beneath the steady movement of time and weather forever onward. History begins to resemble seasonal weather across geological terrain. Kingdoms rise, expand, weaken, and fade like rivers swelling after rain. The Earth is older than every boundary ever drawn. Yet humans continue building, trading, and remembering because creation feels natural to them, even while larger planetary rhythms move slowly beyond perception across immense cycles of time always. You notice how the Bronze Age ends without a single conclusion. Technologies shift, trade adapts, languages blend, and new societies emerge from older foundations. Continuity remains beneath change. Bread still bakes, boats still travel, and children still sleep under stars, reflected in rivers flowing toward unseen seas, carrying human life forward through quiet transitions across generations together. Above the sleeping world, constellations move as they did for ancient travelers crossing deserts and seas. Human lives are brief compared with celestial cycles, yet each contains warmth, work, memory, and wonder. Even forgotten individuals contribute to history's fabric, forming a continuous human thread stretched across time beneath the steady turning sky that never truly stops watching below. Night deepens across plains, ruins, canals, and coastlines, where Bronze Age echoes remain buried under soil and grass. Wind moves through reeds, water flows in darkness, and insects continue their small songs. History becomes quieter with each passing moment, as if the world itself is exhaling after long centuries of human presence across shifting landscapes and forgotten paths. You rest within that quietness, as the earth cools beneath distant stars and forgotten cities lie sleeping under fields and hills. No armies march, and no palace fires burn anymore in the darkness surrounding these ancient landscapes tonight. Only the planet's steady rhythm remains, shaping mountains and slowly wearing them down across unimaginable ages. Human monuments fade, Yet the ground beneath them continues its patient movement without interruption, carrying time forward beyond memory, empire, or any single human moment. And slowly, memory dissolves into wider stillness surrounding rivers, deserts, coastlines, and plains where ancient voices once filled the air. The world grows quieter, then quieter still, until only wind, distant water, and the slow breathing of the earth remain beneath a sky that has always continued turning long after every empire and name has faded away into silence. The script comes to a close. Thank you all for listening.